Andrea's lead.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're live, but we're going to wait until LinkedIn goes live. So I'm keeping an eye on that. You guys had a good week?
Yeah,
So far, so
not too
good.
bad. Not bad. Mixed week. It's a busy week. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just talking amongst ourselves right now. This is kind of the behind the scenes kind of. Hey ho, it's Kermit the Frog here.
All right. Hey ho, it's Kermit the Frog. The network state meeting is happening in Singapore today. If we weren't doing this, I would have gone. So that's the teal, sanctuary cities, all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
Which looks fairly empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, the Kermit the Frog thing should sound a bit more like this. Hey ho, it's Kermit the Frog here, and welcome to the show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're on.
All right, we are on. Well, welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is David Coe.
Are you Richard?
Could be me. I was waiting for Joe. Here, bottom right, we have me, Richard Basalato, today from Amsterdam, of all places.
And my name is Joe Augustine. We are the foursome that tries to make sense of the polycrisis, which, by the way, is the polycrisis or metacrisis is the simultaneous occurrence of several catastrophic events all happening at the same time, which you might know better as the term shit show, which is why we call the shit show. So we're trying to make sense of it, and we're also trying to find different voices from different places for diversity. And we have today with us someone who represents. I say this with a little bit of a hesitation because he's not that young, and yet we're calling him young. It just means that we're old. His name is Alexander Sasha Tilmany. And I think he's our youngest guest we've had so far, and we're delighted to welcome him on board. We're going to call you Sasha from now on. He's worked at the U.S. Department of State initially as an intern and later as an administrative assistant. And before this, he was a program assistant at the Foreign Services Institute and also worked as a research associate at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. He is passionate about U.S. foreign policy, researching China and Asia, and has worked in anti-corruption and more broadly as a technical policy analyst. Today, Sasha is in Singapore and working out his next chapter, and he's going to give us his view on the polycrisis. Sasha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
No, so
well, Sasha, tell us more about yourself that we didn't quite mention in that intro. If someone's, you've met someone at the party, and it's a very special kind of party where politics is welcome. Very quickly, what would you describe yourself?
Yeah, so I grew up in the state of Connecticut. It's the one next to New York. I came from a family that really emphasized the sort of worldly outlook. My grandparents and my father immigrated to the U.S. It was so having that sort of outlook was always really important to them. And they were happy to nurture my interest in that regard, especially in a place where I'm from, where, social status is so important, and that's not really a road to achieving that. I got my undergraduate degree in international affairs at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where I've lived for the past 10 years. I worked as a research assistant at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. I focused mostly on Chinese minority issues and human rights issues. Two major works that I assisted with were the Karakux List and the Xinjiang Police Files. These were analysis of leaked documents surrounding the security system in the Xinjiang region of China. After that, I did a stint at the Foreign Service Institute. That's sort of like the State Department's training center. And then I moved over to the anti-corruption office at the State Department, where I've been until a few months ago when I decided to leave and come here and try and make it here.
Nice.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Great story. Very, very strong build-up.
Yeah. And I met Sasha through a mutual friend, and I was just really impressed with his understanding of the world, but also, even though he's young by our definition, so we've got 3 Gen Xers and 1 young baby boomer. as the regular host. So we're always looking for a diversity of opinion, and obviously you bring the millennial view, but I think you're paying a little bit more attention to most people in your age group, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess you could qualify me. So if the millennial generation is born 1981 to 1996, I was born in 1995. In fact, I turned 30 years old yesterday.
Oh,
Wow.
happy birthday!
Yeah.
Congratulations.
And so that would put me about in the, I guess, if you want to be really technical, put me in the zillennial generation,
Yeah.
between millennial and Gen Z. But I'm happy to lend my perspective.
Right.
I do suspect that Sasha, you may be a little bit like myself, because I was a 40-year-old when I was 25. So it's
Yeah.
Well,
I
according
like
to
to be
some,
25.
yeah, according to some, I'm still 15, so that's okay. But it's very interesting because you're actually just a couple of months younger than our eldest, who turned 30 in June. So I'm going to be very, very interested to hear your perspective on these issues from exactly that age bracket.
Mm.
Can I just check whether people had that same phrase of kind of act your age, not your shoe size? Is that like something that was just peculiar to people talking to me, or is that like
No, it's yeah. That was an Australian saying too. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, shall we get stuck in? So I'm gonna feature you now, Sasha, and just there we go. All right, so we're going to start with really talking about the polycrisis, but also mainly attempting to understand it from your perspective. So we've got it obviously from our perspective. So let's start with the world that your generation inherited.
Right. So I would say the story of the millennial generation is largely one of institutional decay following a long period of institutional progress. What I mean by that is that throughout the 20th century, you saw decolonization followed by consolidation of states, followed by the expansion of government services, welfare states, advancements in civil rights and human rights legislation and protection for minorities, those sort of things. And then it's now when the millennials start to become of age in the 2000s. That's when all that progress really starts to reverse. So one of the outcomes of like the post-Cold War. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're back.
You just say stuff
Yeah.
a bit, but we can hear you.
Yeah, we can
definitely.
hear you fine. It was just a blip, I think.
Hi.
Yeah. All right. Can you hear us? We can still hear you, Dos.
yeah, maybe he can't.
Okay, good. Yeah. So the world that the millennials inherited after the Cold War was something of broad progress as well as international cooperation, multilateralism, the establishment of supranational bodies that promise to protect the individual, things like the European Union, the United Nations, etc. The Green Revolution, of course, was also really important. This guaranteed this guaranteed nutrition for millions of people. And by the time of the 1990s, I'm sure you've heard the term "the end of history." Well, that was the predominant narrative that the thinker Francis Fukuyama said, that the Western liberal democracy was sort of the final form of government, and that in the future it will only be more refined versions of that. But after writing his book in which he proclaimed that, which, to be fair to him, he also did say that they did have an opportunity to mess it all up, and they certainly did.
Just a perspective from the outside here, right?
So,
I mean, we
in
speak
this
about
era,
it being,
you see the expansion of multilateral bodies, like I talked about, like the World.
So, Joe, do you want to? So
I'm not sure
Sasha,
if
you're pausing, but we can still hear you. But
yeah, I'm not sure if you're hearing us as well. I was just wondering from a perspective, like we talk about the world that's been inherited. I think there's an issue with the
Connection. Yeah,
no
think-
connection here.
yeah.
I'm
I think
just
it's
curious
coming
about
back.
whether he feels that the millennials have actually inherited it yet, or have we, or they're just seeing how we're messing it up before they pick it up. You know what I mean?
All right, let's get him back up.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
So you would have missed what Joe just said.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was just thinking, Sasha, that if you're looking at this right now, we talk about this in terms of the world you've inherited. I'm wondering whether or not the feeling is you haven't even managed to get to the point of inheritance yet. You know, you're like King Charles, just waiting at the side and seeing all that go by while you're waiting for your chance to do something about it, or at least get a chance to do something about that. Does that feel a bit like that?
It does, and there is a lot of data to support that. I'm sure you've heard the term the gerontocracy. Your average world leader is becoming older and older. A lot of these governing systems, they become more hostile to outsiders, young people entering it, and as a result, we've seen institutional decay. There's no talent or new ideas cycling through, and that's something that's definitely contributing to the loss in trust of institutions.
You should read what I've been writing. You like that? No, but I mean, absolutely. I think part of that is because population is aging, so young people in that way. So for people like yourself, our children, they don't look to having children because they see the future as really something quite bleak.
Yeah.
And so what happens is you've got this aging group that holds all the wealth and power. They're all the boomers, and they're going on there. And older people, despite what they say, don't believe them when they say they're just as creative and innovative and energetic as young people. They're not. So this is the source of your decay that you're talking about.
But also their dominance, right? Just political dominance is voting dominance, which is only just gone. So we're still in that lethargy afterwards, where the old buggers get to keep ruling.
Well, yes, but I would probably object a little bit to that, because it's actually not a uniform picture. It's somewhat dependent on the actual demography of the specific country.
True. This is Western.
Yeah, exactly. And you have very different population structures in the Western world, mostly dependent on what happened during World War II and the following migration into these countries. So it's not, at least in European perspective, the demographics look quite different across the continent. And me, having grown up in Sweden, yes, I can totally see how the political generation that held the power effectively for 30 years implemented all the structural change that systematically favored themselves, particularly with regard to pension systems and social security systems, etc. So power corrupts. When you get to power, you're going to do what's good for you, right? But it's not the uniform picture which age bracket that actually was favored the most.
Yeah, and that's especially true in this part of the world, right? And we're seeing it with the Gen Z demonstrations that are happening. We've got, I think, 3 people died in Morocco this week, and they're all Gen Z protests. I don't know if you know, they've got this flag. It's an anime-inspired flag with a pirate on it. That's becoming the symbol of the resistance, but a different generation, right? So getting back to Sasha, right? So keep going. What's your view? We'll try not to interrupt.
Yeah, so again, kind of the world that the millennials inherited, this was one of rising living standards. There was rapid economic growth throughout the second half of the 20th century, spurred on by globalization, mainly. There was advancements, legal protections for women, minorities, all sorts of things. So someone who was born, so say you were born in like the 1920s in a place like Alabama, women couldn't get credit cards. There was Jim Crow. There was, voter suppression. There was no access to family planning services, that sort of thing. And if you lived all the way to, say, 2008, not only were those states, but you also have your first Black president. So I think for previous generations, theirs was very much a story of progress, whereas for the millennial generations, it's progress interrupted and reversed. in many respects, because by the time you get to the 20th century, I talked about the advancement in civil rights and human rights in all those regards, as well as in multilateralism and global cooperation. The 1990s period of immediate post-war era really promised to me promised to be an era where disputes between countries are going to be solved diplomatically, and they can be solved peacefully. And for example, I would give like the Dayton Accords that ended the Yugoslav wars, the Good Friday Agreement that ended the troubles in Northern Ireland, and the handover of Hong Kong to China. These were all very, very innovative policy measures that promised that were used highly sophisticated means to create really, really good outcomes for the people that it concerned. And so I think there was great hope in that time period that wars between states that were going to be a thing of the past, and that the future will be bright and just look more more and more refined democracy and legal protections for people. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be, because by the time of the turn of the millennium, that really really reversed. So some turning points, for example, like one of my earliest memories is 9/11, that had great consequence. The subsequent war on terror had a huge impact, and just directly or indirectly led to a lot of the progress that during the 20th century being reversed. There's also the rise in partisan media that really started implanting the ideas that our institutions were inherently flawed, especially our governing institutions. That those are something that should be reduced in favor of things like tax cuts or shrinking the social safety net. And we also have the rise of the uber wealthy, the oligarchs, the billionaires. We've essentially decided that money equals political power, especially in the United States after the Citizens United decision, and then we've let people just kind of accumulate unlimited wealth, which equals unlimited political power, and they're certainly using it to enact their agenda. Yeah. So I talked about the decay in trust in institutions. A large degree, so there are two components to that, in my opinion. There's sort of an internal component and an external component. One way in which you can lose trust in institutions is that the institution itself does not provide for who it's supposed to provide, and that's pretty obvious. And there are areas where governing institutions they do come up short in that regard. But the second is sort of external, is sort of like a PR effort by partisan media, by certain figures, certain wealthy figures, to try and push through a narrative that institutions are failing, and that leads to a certain degradation in trust in institutions, and because we live in representative democracies, that people will vote for representatives that will starve those institutions of resources, which only causes them to fail further. So take education, for example. That's a big issue in the U.S. Far from perfect, but generally speaking, the school systems with the most funding tend to perform the best. However, there are some notable examples of the education system failing. And so what we've seen in the past couple of decades is a concerted effort by partisan media to try and condition people to believe that that public education is like a lost cause, that funding and resources should be taken away and reappropriated to things like private schools, charter schools, home schools, that sort of thing. And as a result, the public education system has begun to fail. Yeah.
You dumb down your population, you dumb down everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same in Australia. That's their education system's really suffering. I know in the UK it's happening. It's really fascinating being in Asia because the investment in education is a massive priority for government. So in Thailand, just watching the way the education system was operating, it's all about getting the kids educated, knowing it guarantees a better future for everyone. So seeing that degradation in the West compared to what I see in Asia, I found that contradiction really fascinating.
Yeah. So I mentioned Francis Fukuyama before, and he made an observation. He observed this cycle that happens with institutions where people come to believe that the institution is failing, so that resources should be taken away and reapportioned somewhere else. And then the institution fails further because of that, and that's taken as more evidence for taking resources away. And this cycle continues until either it's reversed or the institution just totally breaks down. According to him, that was something that was pretty unique to the United States, but now we're starting to see it elsewhere in the world, places like the European Union.
All right, anyone want to add anything? David, you were having a chuckle earlier.
Yeah, I can't go on which bit, but I mean, I think there's a lot of what you say is clearly what we observe, and I think what you're pointing out is the political basis or political economy basis of kind of how we have the polycrisis in that way, because I think what people forget is that there is behind all of this are people and the way that people have chosen to govern themselves and elected a particular form of governance. And what's interesting is the optimism in your upbringing. The upbringing is an upbringing of optimism. It was build of dreams, build it and they will come. This is going to be perfect, and then it ran into the reality. From my side, it's always about the money, and the money is running out. The money is running out because the demands are growing, and I think people don't really realize it. I've said this several times, but every time people sort of really. Retired people live off profits of businesses because they don't work. That means that whatever the business can make as the profit, it goes somewhere. It goes to retired people. So this initial start where we talked about the aging population and all the rest of it, as more and more people look to retirement, get to retirement, the more they need the businesses to keep producing lots of money. And they basically soak it all up, which means that there is nothing left for young people. There's nothing left for political governments that can actually favor the young people as a result of that. People really don't see that, and I think a lot of what you're saying has to be understood in terms of that, because public education, how much can you afford to give to it? Collecting rubbish, how much can you afford to give to it? Versus being able to look after the older people. And the other part that people don't realize, technology, what does it do? When I find a cure for cancer, I'm prolonging the lives of my 80-year-olds. So I'm actually increasing the demand as a result of kind of worthless services in that way. I mean, I worthless in the sense of the overall productivity. They don't produce, they consume in that way. And the young people who can actually create new resources find that their innovations, what they actually does, is to prolong that further where they're stuck in, if you like. So I want to throw that in there, but I want to throw another part, which is actually quite helpful, which is that what all this means is that there is actually a great wealth transfer, which I'm not sure if you've come across, which is that, it's starting now because the boomers are in the oldest boomers are in their 80s, and they're going to die off. The youngest one now in the 60s, and they're going to go kite boarding and stuff. So that's a great thing along. So that great transfer is, you expect to be something like $20 trillion by 2030, with about another 60 trillion to come after. If you invest it in the same way as the boomers have invested it, which is largely to secure their own future individually, that is going to make everything worse. That's really that power that you have, opening that you have. So I just want to leave it with that.
I think
Not vaguely suggesting to Sasha that communism might be the answer.
well, well, that's what the Gen Z protests are all about. They tend to be more socialist sort of leaning. So I think we are going to see that. But it was really it was really interesting listening to Sasha talk about, you know, his first memory is 9/11. I was 31 when 9/11 happened. I was supposed to be in the World Trade Center that day and cancelled the night before. It's a whole story. My boys weren't even born when it happened, right? But I remember being in the States at that point and knowing that it wasn't just the event. I knew that it was a change in the psyche of America that we were all witnessing that was not a positive change. And I remember talking to people at the time, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" But I think it's, you know, I think a lot of the militarism, a lot of the things that we've witnessed since, you know, when you're talking about the powers that sort of sow the distrust, the external forces in institutions, you know, if we look at, you know, the trust barometer that's been published for more than 20 years, that's a significant concern. But it started earlier when I remember the decimation of the trade unions and people believing that that was a good thing, even though it was their industry, right? And so now we've got to the point of the gig economy where there's no protection for people, you know. So we spend so much time voting for things that are not in our own interests, and that's what we've been saying. Well, that's what we've always seen, but it seems to be getting worse. You know, the climate denialism. I see the people and I listen to people who are denying it, and it tends to be older people, not younger people. So just from that perspective, you know, when you see that conversation happening, like how does that make you feel when you know, this is a future looking like for your generation, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, so it's interesting you brought up the note about like labor unions. It talked about institutional decay in terms of government, but it's also our social institutions that have decayed significantly.
Yeah.
And that just has far-ranging consequences because there's this famous book. It's called Democracy in America. It was written by a French guy named Alexis de Tocqueville. In the 1820s, he came over to the U.S. He wanted to figure out how this country could work when it didn't have a common religion, culture, or a monarch to rally around. And what he found was that it was civil institutions that held everything together. It was everyone was a member of some sort of civil society group, whether that was a church or a club or something. And that was the sort of the glue that held the society together. And that's something that lasted through probably to the second half of the 20th century. That also started to decline. People started, the social groups like, the Freemasons or the Lions Club or the Rotary Club, those started to disappear, and people, as well as like churches and labor unions. So people became more atomized, more stratified. And now it's, we've lost that. And people are, like I said, have become, they're unable to organize in a way to affect change because of that.
And then in the last 10 years, we've got that social media influence in the mix, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure you've heard of this. There's another famous book called Bowling Alone. It talked about this phenomenon. Yeah. The idea is that everybody had like some sort of club or something, a civil society group they were a part of. And the book that uses the bowling league as an example, millions of men across the country were a part of recreational bowling leagues, and that's kind of what helped them feel like a sense of being part of a greater community. But that's declined in a big way. And that has a lot of consequences for our politics and our future. And our ability to effectuate the kind of change that we want.
But as a young man, I mean, a lot of the changes that we're seeing have been very negative towards young men, especially the online world. And I was reading, sorry, I'll take you off screen so you can have a bit of a break. I was reading a piece where they're talking about a lot of the radicalization is actually happening on the left, not on the right, even though we believe it's on the right. But it's actually, and they were referring to things like eco-terrorism, right? Which isn't a left or a right. It's actually both. And eco-terrorism actually predominantly started on the right, not on the left, which most people have missed. And it was a long time ago they tried to take over the Sierra Club when they realized that people would be crossing the border in numbers. So it was the southern sort of states. But a lot of the things that we're seeing at the moment, everyone's trying to attribute blame. But it's actually, there's this huge percentage of young men who are lost in this more gaming in the digital world. It's not necessarily social media, even though it's classified that way. And, we're starting to see the impacts of that, and the blaming of the left and the right, I don't think is really helping, because there's a societal undercurrent that's a problem. And it's obviously not just in the US, it's around the world. And I remember listening to a podcast where this guy that is an expert in this stuff said, so first of all, there's this group of men in Pakistan. There's men in Pakistan without jobs. And there's a Pakistani word which basically means men who stand around leaning against walls because they've got nothing else to do. So they're bored out of their brains, right? So masses of men with nothing to do is never a good thing in any society.
Right.
And what this expert, I wish I could remember his name, said is in Western societies now, in particular, young men are not able to have sexual conquests. They're not able to succeed financially, and they're not able to succeed socially. So the ramifications of that are negative things for societies, and we've got to do something about it. I mean, I didn't talk to you about this before, but do you want to jump in on that?
No, actually, this is exactly one of my points, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Cool.
And this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think this is largely a consequence of the transition to an information-based society, or an information economy, rather. Because in the US and in a lot of the developed world, to access the high salary jobs, it requires an education. Consistently, the higher your degree is, the higher the income you're going to have, most likely. And it just so happens that women and girls perform much better in education than men. They get higher grades in primary, secondary, and college. They tend to go on. They now form the majority of incoming college students. They are far more likely to go on and get masters and PhDs. And as a result, they just get higher paying jobs, higher ranking positions within companies. And the way our society works, it tends to be that the man tends to be supposed to be the breadwinner, right? And we're still kind of stuck in that view. So I think if we're going to kind of heal this issue, then we're going to have to kind of redefine, in many cases, what it really means to be a man, and what your obligations, what your duties are.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it seems to be going the other way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're seeing much more misogyny. We see, what's his name, the US guy, calling back all the generals to tell them you've got to be men. And he's defining what that means. Kind of what he's defining is like a version that they did many, many years ago, kind of thing. So I think this part is going back. I'm glad you mentioned bowling alone. I was going to ask you about that, and I think one of the points in it is actually that as an activity like bowling, you had all these different people with completely different views all together pursuing one thing, which is having a drink. Basically, bowling is basically the excuse for having a drink. I think the point along there about the problem with bowling alone is they don't buy the beers anymore. That's why the bowling hall's shut. And so I mean, that aspect of social capital and how that brings about, that's really the challenge for you guys, right? Because you can either accept or you can actually go ahead, because you have tremendous power in a new kind of governance, in allowing a new kind of governance to emerge, because the existing governance, as you described, is all failing. It's not serving you anymore. What I find bizarre is so many young people are trying to reinstate the same governance They're trying to reinstate this sort of very hierarchical structure, this massive thing. When today, you can actually tackle all these issues by interactions between young people, young as in younger than me, from all the different countries, when you know the governments won't agree.
Yeah.
And so my question, and this is what I want to do, is really to kind of prompt, why don't you?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, you're asking why don't we like reform our governance systems?
Yeah, it's time for revolution. That's what he's saying.
Just go
Come on,
and
get out with your flags.
let your genius shine, and go and be that new emergent society.
Yeah, rather than voting for authoritarian leaders that are going to destroy your societies and make it
when you get
worse
the
for
next
everyone else.
kind of
Well, that's what we're like.
Yeah.
You think there's 3 of us who are Gen X here. I will not have more voting power than my parents until 2028. You guys have more voting power than your grandparents and your parents, right? So Gen X, we're all sitting there. We've been through it all, right? I was actually I was talking about this last night, and I'd be interested to see if Joe and Richard agree, and David as well. We were the last generation that were allowed out. There was no supervision. We were, especially from the Western world, obviously, because it was very different in places like China and India at the time. But we had decent educations in public systems, that sort of thing. But unless you came from a very fortunate upbringing, it wasn't a massively privileged way of being. But you could come out of that and create opportunities for yourself that would just. I mean, I'm a girl from a country town in Australia who's managed to work and travel the world, and wow. But I didn't come from any privilege. I just came from a time, and it was pre-digital. It was when there was still, a fairly sort of stable middle ground in the media. It went a bit left, a bit right, but it wasn't what we see today. And we also emerged into the digital revolution. We remember before, and we've lived it since, even though we're not digital natives. So I think Gen X, in lots of ways, even though we don't have the power, we had the greatest. We're the greatest generation as far as the privileges that we had and the life that we had, and our rivers and our creeks and our oceans were clean. It was pre that mass consumption sort of cheap. It was pre all of that, and so I suppose when I look at your generation, you were born in that without memory before it. So, how can you guys sort of turn it all around, Richard?
I think this is really, really important. It's actually very profound what you touch upon. And in Sweden, I grew up in Sweden, emigrated in the early 90s, came back a few years, but been living in London for 30 years. We were the last generation in the Swedish society, if you're born, as an early Gen Xer, in particular, late 60s. We kind of born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s, got our education in the 80s, and made our career in the 90s. You were still protected, but what was then the welfare state, with an implicit promise that we would look after you in terms of education and retirement. And if you couldn't find a half-decent job, we would give you a minimum standard of living. That eroded for many reasons. And what Andrea says is we were out at all hours. I mean, as a pre-teenager, I was allowed out till midnight on a school day. It wasn't a problem. There were no dangers in society, and I still grew up in a fairly big city like Stockholm, which you wouldn't even consider for your kids today, because it was still an unblemished, untouched world. But something profound happened in the latter stages here. We got a massive turbocharge in the Western world from effectively defeating communism and tearing down the Berlin Wall. And we got a rough decade, which was the 90s, which coincided with us having our careers, where you had an unbelievable boost to the global economy, driven by a new wave of globalization, and a complete destruction of military spending, which unleashed trillions of dollars globally that was sent to work in more productive fashion. That will never get repeated again because September 11 happened and military spending kind of stopped declining. And since then, it's been ramping up. And it's really unproductive spending that we've taken away from institutions like education, healthcare, and everything else. So that bubble that we grew up in will not get repeated for these structural, actually economic reasons. And that cannot happen for your generation in that sense. But you need to find, and this is what David is talking about, it's up to you to come back and find the solutions that work in a world which will not have the kind of tailwind that we experienced. It wasn't, our fault that we got this windfall, but it happened for reasons way beyond our control. And I still have a little bit the sense of kind of resentment for we got it handed to us. And we did, right? We got it handed to us. We are extremely lucky. When I meet my old friends in Sweden, we're always talking about things that are touching upon these issues, how lucky we were growing up in kind of an untouched world without big problems. Environment wasn't an issue. We defeated sort of the risk of, Third World War. When I was a little kid, every first Monday, every month, we had the test of the global alarm, and you could go down to the nuclear bunker. That was the early 70s. And we defeated all that. But now it's kind of, you need to find a way in a society that will not hand you this opportunity because the government spending will not be there. And that was partially our fault because we demanded too much of our systems. There wasn't.
Well, I think there's something in what Sasha was saying earlier. We didn't grow up with a promise, but you grew up with a promise. And if anything, that was the problem. We promised that you could do anything, everything was yours, and so on. And the international structures and all these things. You had Model UN in school, where you were all about how we can change the world by being like the UN. We didn't have the Model UN. We'd fight in the streets with police. That's what we did. That was our upbringing. And because there was a police academy down the road from where we were, so we used to pick fights with each other.
Is this in Hong Kong, David?
This is in London.
Right.
We had all those things. We had outright racism and misogyny and everything else that you can imagine. But we didn't have that promise. And I think, we still do. We still do, especially that's an interesting point. That's quite a piece that's happened, right? But I think in some ways this is I have a book coming out and it's really for young people, and it sort of talks about a new finance, basically, and how you can actually make that happen. A few things are necessary, and most of all what's necessary is to embed in this kind of awakening awareness of all the issues and where it comes and how you want, and wanting to have that road, believing the greatest hurdle in it, the greatest denial is the denial that things can change. And that's exhibited in constantly thinking it's governments who are going to change it. They're not. They won't. They won't ever change it.
No. All right, Sasha, so we bring you back. What do you think? Over here. So, how do we get you guys revolting?
So at least from my perspective in the U.S., we talked about the gerontocracy. The average age of the member of Congress has been rising steadily. People without term limits, people just stay on pretty much for their whole lives until they're very old, which has some pretty disastrous consequences. And it's not healthy for any kind of political system. Like the Soviet Union had, shortly before it collapsed, it had like 3 different leaders in the span of 5 years. They all died of old age. And now we
alcoholism.
And now in the U.S. we have, our presidents are increasingly old. Our senators are increasingly old and are refusing to retire. So it's really just going to take like a grassroots movement among like the pro-democracy parties, the pro-democracy forces, to try and inject new blood into these systems so that we can finally make the change that we really need to.
Yeah, and sort out the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're still thinking the same way. I think skip that. This is a global consideration. So just connect globally and use your agency, your economic agency, your political autonomy as independent agents. Everything works by consent, willingness to consent to be governed. That's the essence of the whole political economy, is consent to be governed. And the fallacy is thinking that you have to comply. I think that's the part where really when we were growing up, it was constantly pushing against that. I remember being at university during the time of the miners' strikes, and the university was really concerned about the students at the time, because they were saying, where is that energy and the radicalism here? They're so concerned about getting their degree that they've forgotten what they're here for, which is not to get the degree.
Yeah, it's so true. And the other thing that really concerns me about young people is the resilience in young people. I totally agree, David. So, Sash, it's time for revolution. So stop messing around, get global, unite under the pirate flag if you need to. But yeah, let's move on to the main sort of news, because we've got a lot that we're going to try and cover today, and we're going to do some quick and some slower. But I want to start with what we're not going to talk about, because it's been one hell of a week. So I'll start most recently. Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the problem. I mean, that's another topic we're going to talk about. That is part of the problem. But obviously, we saw some breaking news yesterday that there was two Jewish people were killed and 4 seriously injured in Manchester at a synagogue. We're not going to talk about it today because details are still coming out, and emotions are still running very high. I've seen some posts from people in the UK about it, that it's not the way I would express it, but it's new. Obviously, Greta Thunberg and other activists have been detained by the Israeli military. So let's see what happens there. I really hope they're not stupid in Israel and do something bad there. We talked about the GenZ protests that are erupting across the world. So there's I mentioned there's this pirate anime from Japan that's become the central sort of visual representation. Argentina's president, who's just nuts. Anyway, the US is going to help them out economically. But, isn't the guy that's in Venezuela, isn't he also right-wing?
Maduro?
Yeah. Isn't he also right-wing?
He's a Chavista, so he's left-wing.
He's pretty extreme on the left, I would say. But,
But still authoritarian, right?
There is always the argument that the extreme right and the extreme left kind of has some unified features when you get extreme enough, right?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
It's not a line. It's sort of circular.
Yeah, exactly. The anti-vaxxers and the spiritualists that I met. There's a new antibody. There's a new antibody defying COVID that's in town, and it's doing the rounds now with every new type of virus, COVID variant that comes out. It's whether it takes hold. So it's still, we're not at that point if it's going to become dominant. Omicron remains. We're waiting to see what happens to Diddy, but it won't be a life sentence. Been interesting this race, seeing Starmer's popularity is even lower than Liz Truss, which is kind of just mind-blowing to me. But anyway, is this the week where he maybe turned it around? Especially, I think they've finally understood the risk with reform. Moldova's pro-EU party won the election, which had a lot of Russian interference. The UK Reform's former leader has been, and taking money from the Russians. The US Supreme Court has sided with Trump in freezing $4 billion in foreign aid, which obviously we know has a big impact. Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, Peter Thiel, and Prince Andrew have all been named in the Epstein files. But ironically, it's Duchess Fergie who's losing out from her email to Epstein. I can't remember, she used some royal Sloaney type of words. So there's a female in prison because of Epstein. Duchess Fergie has lost basically all of her business and all of her charities. I'm still waiting to see a man get punished around this whole Epstein thing. Don't you find that ironic that it's the women? And the final thing is, I was kind of asking the question, is Larry Ellison the latest member of the Nerd Reich? And I don't know, he's consolidating power with his son David, and I think he's probably definitely in that crew. So that's the stuff we're not going to talk about. Any other news items that you didn't see on the agenda?
Well, he's something that's kind of caught my eye, and this is the one of these. It was an article in the FT, and it was it caught my eye because it was stupid. In my eye, it was stupid. Let's be plain about this. And this was, how do we now capture carbon out of the atmosphere? There's this company that's now operating and is writing about this. It's really innovative. It's fantastic, and is to basically spray stones on our agricultural land, so that kind of the stones naturally, certain types of stones naturally kind of get absorb carbon dioxide when they go along gas use. So you have this thing where it says, this is fantastic. We're going to do this. There's plenty of agricultural land. So now we're really going to kill the soil. We're going to overlay it with lots and lots of stones every year. And we're going to have to break these stones from some quarry somewhere, have these big breaking machines in order to do that, just so that we can spray it here and make it work in that way. And then the farmers are going to go and they're going to try and plant and use their plows in the middle of these and doing all the stuff that they have to do. But anyway, the fact that it was actually in the FT kind of said there's really no kind of awareness. Is probably some placed article that someone had in there.
I've seen that story around for a while, David, and I think maybe just keep your eye out for a little bit more on that, because I think there's a lot more to it. But carbon sequestration, we're not going to do it, right? It's not an option. All right, so our first big news story. Well,
I mean,
you know what I mean. Yeah. I know. But it's apparently the rocks are from the Arctic, and there's a lot more to the story.
Even better, doesn't it? We're going to pick up the
well, exactly.
We're going to transport it across.
Yeah. Jane Goodall died this week, and she died in California, and she was on a pretty hectic speaking tour. 91 years old, and we obviously don't know the details, but I just think it's an opportunity to say thank you to an amazing lady who did so much, and she never stopped. And one of the things I loved about her was the energy that she carried with her, which was just so gentle and loving. No matter what, no matter how bad it got, she never changed. Anyone want to sort of reflect?
I think she's she was a living testament, actually attacking David's notion that older people are not as vital and not as vibrant and not as energetic as young people. She was in her 90s, for God's sake, and she was still effectively working full time, albeit at things and at a pace that suited her. And I saw an interview with her that was actually But that's what young people do too. Both my kids, they have a flexible work schedule with 2 days a week from home. It's like suiting you, right? So I don't think we can blame her for that.
That's the fallacy of picking the one in 100,000 and say, every one of the other 99,999 is like that. I mean, that's what people constantly do, is they go and pick the exceptional and actually use that as an example for the majority. That's
okay.
There is an
element of that.
I'll see you at 91.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to get there. But, I have tremendous respect for the people that keep on going and doing those things. Because I think essentially that's what life's about. You want to keep going and doing things, preferably a few different things as you get older. And I saw an interview with her not that long ago, maybe 6 months ago. I think it was on the BBC, when she said, what got me into all this is the sense of adventure, right? It's like a small child speaking. It's the sense of adventure and doing all these amazing things that you just want to do. And I'm so excited about my next adventure, which is death, because I know it's coming pretty soon. And for me, it's new, right? It's unexplored. And I really want to understand what that is all about. And I thought, wow, that is good going. It's not how most people sort of think and face as the final phase in their life, because I do it with great trepidation, right? Most people I know don't really even want to talk about it. And she was so forthright and forthcoming. It's like, this is going to be a great new adventure.
Yeah. All right, Sash, Joe, do you want to say anything?
Well, I just hope to be someone who is contributing when I'm considered old and continue to have the judgment good enough to say that it's time when it's time. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few men around the world that could get that lesson, right?
Harsh.
It's one of those things where there's always the right kind of person and the wrong kind of person. I was always, when I was young, I was too young. When I was old, as I get older now, I'm getting too old. I've always been to something else, right? And it just whether it's a matter of convenience for the people in that particular moment, right? I mean, if there was somebody who was able to still express themselves in a way that still was useful and move things in the right direction. I mean, we all have examples of someone very old like that. And I think we all have examples of someone very young who can also express themselves in that way. And similarly, we might say, why would you trust someone young in terms of, the future? You talk about people, if you remember your own life, and even if you're being a very responsible person, I mean, we're with Sasha, who is not, I think, the central representative of someone of his age group as well, right? The average person in his age group probably thinks rather differently. They probably have some borrowed ideas of what it's going to be about, but I don't think they have the same kind of historical knowledge that he has, the narrative of politics and all those things that come along, the consequence of behavior. I think there is a sense of borrowed injustice. I just remember I can still remember being a teenager and being angry just because, I think there's a bit of that as well. There's a lot of this is wrong. I heard about it from somewhere else, but I don't know specifically what has happened. So I don't know whether they can do anything specifically about that as well. So I was thinking about the answers as to why don't we rebel, and I think it's a lot to do with when you lead and then you look back and no one's following you. That can be a very disheartening thing.
Well, yeah. No, about that, Joe. What's on your T-shirt?
Exactly right.
Just before we get Sasha on, what's on your T-shirt, Joe?
Oh, today I have a shirt that you might enjoy. It's Vaccines Cause Adults.
Nice. All right, Sasha.
Yeah, no, you said exactly right. This a crisis of leadership, and it's something that I've talked about. I've been thinking about for a while. Is the kind of caliber of leaders that we have today is quite different than what we've had in the 20th century. I think our governing systems have just become very complex and very bloated in a certain sense, and to the extent that it really disincentivizes people with innovative thinking. So a lot of people who do have really innovative, really ambitious ideas, they're far better off just going into the private sector rather than serving in the government. And so as a result, we've sort of ended up with this new kind of generation of leaders that are more like managers, if anything. They're good at very good at managing our current system, but not really building on anything new on top of it. And that's what we're seeing in the UK, for example. Labour was elected with a big mandate, but they so far seem really unable to effectuate any kind of change, like building housing and infrastructure. And it's sad because they have a big moment. There is a path toward improving the situation, but the political will just isn't there because it just doesn't have the right leadership. And this is the same story that I could see across the world too.
I take a little bit of exception to that. I think I think
I thought you might.
That's absolutely. and I think what the way you've expressed it is the failure of the youth. is to think that it takes leadership. When we were young, when I was young, nobody thought about being a leader. They just thought about, what am I going to do? And they had some sense, like you had in your description, about how, you know, your upbringing and your kind of diverse view that you had in your upbringing and so on. So there's some sense of what it means to continue in that way. But we were looking for a leader to give us a future. We were just out there to have a go. And in your expression at the moment, you know, the failure of that thinking is the burden on the cost of governance in this way, which I think Richard made some comment to earlier. We just can't afford it. That's why the US has basically a $2 trillion negative deficit in their budget every year. You know, it's a bit less than that, but that's pretty much what it is. You know, it brings in about, I don't know what, 7, and it spends, sorry, it brings in about 5 and it spends 7. And that's why the French government has collapsed again. And that's why Liz Truss's government's collapsed. And that's why when you go from Liz Truss to Labour, the same to Keir Starmer, the same thing happens, because there isn't that money. It's all pre-allocated to all these things. You can't get an extra bit. And as for this idea of bringing it out from all the billionaire and everything else, sure, go ahead, confiscate all their wealth. That will last you less than 1 year before you run into the same problem again. And nobody sees that as a problem. They see that as a lack of leadership. But actually, what it is a lack of individual agency and the desire for individual agency. Young people don't desire that individual political agency. They'd rather have someone else deal with it.
Tough.
Just going to leave it there.
Wow.
Richard?
But, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think for me, the root cause of, let's call it broadly speaking, governance inefficiency and the fact that the money is running out is, and this is, you know, we're all guilty of this. Boomers, Gen X, millennials. We actually demand too much from our whole institutional apparatus. I firmly believe if you're going to be really efficient in what you do, in any form of structure, you need to have clearly defined targets and clearly defined boundaries, what is your responsibility and what you should not be dealing with. The kind of bloatedness that has happened to Western governance structures is that there was some form of implicit and explicit demand from citizens that the state should be dealing with all issues. I think that is fundamentally wrong, and that's why we're running out of money. We can debate where we're going to put this kind of barrier for what the state should be responsible for. I think, in my case, I have pretty clear vision. I think every child should have a solid education. I think you should have the right for healthcare up to a point which is not determined by lifestyle choices. I think you should have a police and a legal system that protects its citizens. You should trust the legal apparatus to work in an efficient and fairly smooth way. But we have demanded so much more than this from our state that we have no more money. And there is always someone to blame for all this. And I just think that is kind of the reckoning moment we have now in the world. There are some very efficient ways, I think, to improve governance structures. And Sasha, definitely, I 100% agree with you that one of the most simple ways we could do to restore faith in institutions is to limit terms. If you come into governance, you have your defined period to make your mark. This is not a career choice where you can hang around infinitely, rack up, a very high pension, and once you leave, use those contacts in the private sector to do various forms of consultancy and get rich. No, you're in governance and government for a limited period of time, and this is your moment to actually enforce the policies that you were elected on because you believe in them in your electorate. You manage to make your electorate believe in you being the person to drive these policies. Then you should go and leave space for someone else. But fundamentally, the underlying issue is the imbalance between what we are prepared to pay in taxes, i.e. what the state can be dealing with, and what we demand, and they are not aligned in the Western world. Let's be honest about that.
But they're not aligned anywhere, and I think I'm even further from you. I mean, I think my point is that where governments fail, we step in. Young people and young professionals can just step in, but the problem if they did that is that takes away the reason to go and call on the governments to do it. So you then end up in the situations where if you believe in governance, you don't step in because you believe that it's the government who has to do it, and so you end up defeating yourself as a result. And I think that the difference is, well, maybe it was me because I had upbringing where I just didn't understand what was going on because I moved from one country to another and those sort of things and didn't understand the language. But we never had that promise of a structure that would provide for you. And when we went to universities, it wasn't about getting a degree.
But you also had that Asian sort of cultural mindset of the family comes together as a collective and moves forward, right? And you take care of each other and you take care of your elders and you do all that sort of stuff. So I think that's such a gift to have as well.
And that's really important because this morning I saw a post by Kate Critchlow, whom we had on Climate before. And it was about, and she was reposting something about complexity and agriculture and how complexity is not priced and so on, and the essence of that, and I made a comment in it on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to follow my comments, have a look in there, was that it's not what is priced. What we now think of is transactional. Everything is transactional, but it's the interactions, it's the not agreeing. It's back to, bowling alone. It's not scoring the strikes. It's actually the bowling and the interactions, the fact that you missed it and people are joking at you about whatever it is. That's what builds the social structure. That's what builds the ability for things to emerge out of it. And when we look to governance, we thin that down because we are saying someone directs something and the rest just follows. There's no richness in that model. And that model is extremely expensive. And we can't afford it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've sort of been saying for a long time now is because life has been so easy and gotten better for everyone for, over this sort of 50-year window, whereas more and more people, more and more middle class have been added to the mix, right? And we've gotten used to sitting on our asses and criticising the people who are out there running the institutions. And it's time to get off the couch and stop complaining and start getting involved. And because we can't, like female politicians are leaving in droves because of the abuse and online threats. And why would anyone want to go into politics right now? You have to have the thickest skin. It's revolting what's going on, right? But before we move on to the next one, Joe, Sasha, do you want to, Sasha, write a reply?
I was going to ask Sasha this question. We talked, David said broadly that the young people don't want to lead, right? Or don't want to take the helm of it. I wanted to ask Sasha, I mean, would you, or is there something that could be done? Under what circumstances would you say, yep, I'm going to step up and do it, right? I mean, I think that there's some kind of calculus to that. It's probably balancing between what you have to give up or whatever. I'm not certain Sasha doesn't want to lead.
Yeah,
there's different ways to lead, right?
Yeah, because it just goes back to what I was talking about before. It's just become the systems have just become so complex that it's just so hard to really get anything like building houses in California now is just like an entire $1 billion process. Or I don't know if you're following like the high-speed rail system in the UK or in California. I think in California it's now like $100 billion and they haven't even launched one train. And that's just because of this layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy and gridlock that if you have any sort of talent or ambition, you're better off just going into the private sector, trying to effectuate change there than going into elected government. So I think if you're going to attract more young people to the governing institutions, you're going to need to really make it worth their time, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to implement some of these major reforms to try and actually so that elected officials can actually enact an agenda for their constituents.
Yeah, although I do think, Sasha, that there's some very big powers behind those things like high-speed rail not going ahead that have got nothing to do with government and have got a lot to do with who's giving who money behind the scenes. So there's no reason the US shouldn't have a better. I mean, China's just launched a new high-speed train that's faster than flying. So where there's a will, there's a way. I don't think the will's been there. So again, you can blame the government, but is it that, or are there other vested interests fighting against it? Because America built a car nation just like Australia did, and they're losing out. All right, so I wanted to move on to the military event, and I was in the army. That was my first job out of university. I was a musician in the Australian Army, and because I was on parade so much as a musician, I had a lot of interactions with the brigadiers and the generals and those guys, and they're very, very, very serious dudes, right? They're not chipper kind of fellas, right? I just felt this incredible cringe watching it. My teenage boys would be happy with my use of the word cringe. But I've also since then, so obviously that we're not hearing from them directly, the people in the room, but we're hearing a lot from retired generals, admirals, all those sort of things. And apparently they continue to be a massive influence on the military. So there's very unimpressed. One of the conversations I was listening to, a lot of what Pete Hegseth was saying was what you can put your hands on the recruits, that sort of stuff. And then this former lieutenant general was saying they stopped all of that because if you don't protect your soldiers in war so that they don't harm themselves psychologically, because if they harm themselves psychologically, that obviously has an impact on society. So a lot of what he was suggesting was stop 30 years ago because they identified the greater harm, not just to the soldiers. So it's created a lot of conversation, obviously, but one of my things is, why didn't they just sit there and go, okay, if you guys don't sort this out, it's time for a coup. That was my fault. They were all there. It could have happened. But anyway, who wants to start? Joe, you haven't said much, so do you want me to get you up?
Well, if you like. I mean, I think in terms of a presentation, it was the worst impersonation of Tony Robbins I've ever seen. It was an attempt to try and galvanize and say a few things that were going to get applause lines, and I mean it really didn't work. And I think I hate to put it in terms of a show, but really Hegseth is the worst kind of warm-up act you can have before you put Trump on as well. I think in the moments where he comes on and he basically accuses people of different things and talks about facial hair and stuff. And for me, my personal view is that Hegseth would be less about the beard if he could grow a good one. It's that kind of thing where he's speaking all these sort of trite comments from the stage and saying this is the way it's going to go. And then I think that moment where he really lost the room with FAFO, which is it's basically it's an internet term talking about F around and find out, right? That's supposed to be what it is, but it basically went out into the ether and no one understood that at all, and so it didn't even have its impact as a line. So it was quite a bad. It was a terrible thing. The whole thing, even the bringing together of everyone for that purpose, was because of the politics involved. It was wholly un-American in terms of what the military is supposed to be. So, in terms of like you talk about FAFO. I mean, look, you're right. This is the kind of moment that really leads to a military coup. That the thing is, I don't think the moment is quite right for that. I think the problem is right now there's so much leaning to the left and right within the organization as well. Everyone's holding their cards quite close to themselves within the military. It's really hard to say what's going to happen. I don't think a coup is going to happen, but I could imagine myself as someone in that audience going like, yeah, it's time.
Yeah, well, something drastic's going to have to happen, right? And there's a lot more talk about his mental state. David, do you want to jump in?
I don't think it is. I mean, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think one thing that caught my eye was that the U.S. Supreme Court had approved 21 out of 23 sort of emergency kind of measures appeals to the Supreme Court from Trump over a very short time in the second term. It hasn't lasted that long. I mean, statistically, if you think about appealing to the Supreme Court, ending up 21 out of 23 times in your favor is kind of pretty remarkable. And the comment made by one of the dissenting judges is, the docket of that comes along and the amount of time spent on it is shorter than what the Supreme Court would normally spend on what they consider as a relatively trivial case. So there's actually no consideration at all. It's just proof, stamped. So what you have in the US at the moment, if you go back to that sort of historical outlook, the more I look at it, the more it really does resemble that period in between the two wars in Germany, as it was sort of reconsolidating its control and power. You move out all the people you don't want. You fire away your government. This is the part, interestingly, with the government shutdown that's going on, is as far as they're concerned, this is fantastic. I can lay off all the other people. Yeah. The initial Department of Government Efficiency did one part of it. Now I can do the rest of it in that way. And they have the full support of everything else. And this side of it is actually bringing along the military. They've already fired off the major generals and head of chief staff or whatever it is. So they're going to go on through. And with the speech, they're going to pick out all the other ones along. So no, you're not going to get the military coup, because this is not, Myanmar or Pakistan or somewhere like that. This is America. The Americans don't think of a military coup in their own country.
I don't know, but they don't think they're going to be an authoritarian state either, right?
But even if they are, I think that's what. Sorry, Richard.
No, but I wholeheartedly agree with you, except for the last point. It's pretty clear your comparison with Germany in the sort of 30s is very pertinent, because if you want to be efficient in that kind of leadership, you need to remove the judicial independency, you need to remove the monetary policy independency, which clearly Trump is hell-bent on and will succeed with. I mean, that's kind of how these mandates fall out. Then you get the control of the apparatus, and you can attempt to do it with the military. I actually don't think he will succeed in the military to the same extent. And for me, that does increase the likelihood, albeit remote, for a military rebellion in the US, where they say, basically, this is not going to work. And something we take totally and wholly for granted in the Western world is that the governing body in politics effectively has a military that is totally loyal to the government. That's something that's not the case in Turkey, obviously. It's not the case in a lot of emerging markets. I think in the UK and the US, you would put these two countries on top of the list, probably with the Scandinavian countries, as saying, here, there is no question that the military will follow the governing body in the country. We're maybe a tad more suspect in places like Spain and Italy, possibly even France, although I think France is pretty close to UK and the US. It's taken for granted that in Latin America, they're not, right? So you are moving this pendulum. All of a sudden, it's not 100% certain that military leadership will stand behind the governing body in the US, to maybe 90. Are we comfortable with those 10% having moved? And how should we price that in financial markets?
Interesting. Sasha, as the American in the room, do you want to give your view? Or I know you can't necessarily talk about all of this, but
yeah, what I will say, because like my whole thing about the declining institutions and trust institutions is that there is one institution that has bucked the trend, and that is the military. Americans still hold its military in very high regards, and so to see this happening, I think is it's a very dark turn. I think.
Yeah.
It's this is something that was supposed to be totally apolitical. It was supposed to be just, it's a very technical institution. And, you know, really what I can only think about now is like, I really wish I were a fly on the wall. You know, after this speech, I really want to know what they were thinking and saying. After that. Yeah.
Well, one of the generals I was listening to, he was saying the president can tell them to do things that are against like the Geneva Convention, but he won't be punished for it, but the soldiers will. So because he's got whatever the Supreme Court gave him, you know, the right to do whatever he wants, and
presidential immunity, or what was it, executive authority or official acts or something.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, so shall we move on to the Gaza peace plan? I added an extra piece that came in overnight. So the Hamas leader in Gaza has basically said, no, I'm not accepting this. Apparently, sorry, no. So apparently, the Gaza leadership in Qatar have said they would be open to accepting it with adjustments. Every headline has been, you know, the European Union says to Hamas, accept this. The Americans say accept it. Everyone says accept it. But at the same time, there's been a lot of coverage saying there is no protection for the Palestinians in this. This isn't in their interest. So there's been two sides to the story. But the other thing is, of course, Netanyahu opening his mouth and changing the rules and saying, well, no, we're not going to honor that, because one of the 20 points is recognition of the Palestinian state, and he's saying, no, that's not going to happen. I think if Hamas doesn't accept it, based on the global sort of outpouring of pressure to accept it, I'm concerned about the impact of that. So who wants to jump in? David, I know you're really passionate about this topic. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think there's two things. I think, first of all, if you have a plan with 20 points, you've got 20 points for people to pick to not accept it. Yeah. So, you know, I look at this and I think I don't want Tony Blair being there. You know, so I have a point in there, and I'm going to and say, you know, why is he there? But, you know, is that relevant to the rest of the thing? Is it the most important thing? No, it's not. So what you end up with, you end up having the trivial elements dictating what happens in that way. So as a plan, I think, you know, for me, the plan would be just start by returning all the people from their different places, the hostages, the bodies, the Palestinians, and all those things. Just start with that without anything else. Just say, that's what we're going to do. What you then left with is a situation where you have to figure out the next step. So now Israel and the Palestinians are now in a situation where the world can now see and say, okay, what is going on now? Now that excuse or reason or rationale or whatever it is for the situation that it is has been resolved in that way, what next? Do we get aid in? Will the Israelis allow actually food to go through into the place and all the rest of it, or not? The other side of this is the global, you know, the flotilla that's going over in there. And when Gandhi started his salt march, he had 78 people along. And by the end of it, 60,000 were arrested, pretty brutally, by the occupiers at the time. And that was the point. The point was they were going to be arrested. But what it did is actually pretty much lost the colony. It made even the British themselves find that what they were doing was untenable in what they were doing. And that's the point. That goes back to the point Sasha was making before about the governance and what we are. We do things because we think it needs to succeed in certain ways. We don't just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's how we get stuck in this argument about governments and all those things. It's very clear what it is that people around the world ought to do, need to do, which is to provide the sustenance that people need in a place where people don't have it. And we can do that. And it doesn't matter if along the way it doesn't get there because of the interference of something else that just says we get more of it out there, more of it out there. We've got all these little bits of crowdfunding things that are going on for all kinds of things. This can take that money better. But we don't talk about that. We end up talking about, as I said, should Tony Blair be involved in this, which is kind of trivializing the whole thing.
All right.
You are correct. You're 100% correct.
Oh.
On a practical level, I cannot see Hamas ever agreeing to this, because if they give up the hostages, they've basically given up the reason to exist at the moment. And then the whole basis for trying to start an effective war against Israel has ceased, and they will cease to become a factor. And given Israel's military gains they've made, why should they stop now? They're probably extremely close to wiping out Hamas, literally, which would be considered an extreme success by Netanyahu, who himself needs to cling to power, not to face charges, right? So practically speaking, I don't see it ending, because Hamas would be done as an organization, and Netanyahu needs to effectively root them out to survive politically.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? Should we move on? Yeah,
I just want to throw one last bit, a little kind of an odd historical parallel, perhaps. My daughter's started sort of in school, and they're studying how the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, the Russian occupation of Afghanistan, and of course, that failed, and eventually, the British tried it before them, and the Americans then went along and tried it, and so on. And in the end, what it is just a very expensive way to put the same people back in power. And, I just wanted to leave with that.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to share in the comments, I'm going to share a video with you from the listening post, and it's how Palantir is transforming modern warfare. Did anyone have a chance to have a look at it before today? I know I gave you a lot.
Pretty terrifying.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, someone who comes from the tech industry. So the commentary in this video is like, it talks about, it's a company that has basically empowered automated warfare. And we've heard about one of the tools in the war in Gaza is called Lavender, and it basically identifies potential targets and to be taken out. And basically, one of the guys that used to create the advertising and the movies and stuff, he's left the company and said it leads to this immense amount of civilian deaths, destruction, and mistakes. They use Hollywood-style advertising. It's all about producing a vibe. When you watch the video, it's very beautifully crafted, but it's dark and appealing to a sense of danger. It's all about tapping into fear. So, and this is all part of a bigger sort of a global movement to instill this fear in us, so that we accept this sort of leadership. So Palantir is technically a data company, but what it does is it collects, interprets, and automates information. And it's been pushing out this message. If you listen to the two founders, one's Peter Thiel and the other one's this guy called Alex Karp. Basically, the West has sort of moved into this culture of complacency, which is what I was talking about. We're sitting on the couch complaining and we're not getting involved. And both of these founders, they're like philosophy majors. They're not tech people. And by being that, what that means is that they understand the philosophy of language, information, and how these tools can be weaponized. So, social media, everything that's been going on for the last 10, 15 years is all about sort of getting us to this point. There's a clash of civilization narrative in the mix. In their personal sort of branding, they're hype men. And the first time I've ever seen this, they're considered defense influencers, which is, they're always making these outrageous claims. Yeah, exactly. The world is in crisis, and basically techno-militarism is sweeping through Silicon Valley. And, they're presenting a sleek startup aesthetic, but it's instead of what we're used to, it's for war. So they're very active on the political stage. You see Peter Thiel in particular everywhere next to Trump, and they're playing a role even in genocide. So, this is interesting. Then there was another piece which I'll share it as well. What will Jesus say? This is the title. Tony Blair, big tech, and the Israel connection. So basically, the story is Tony Blair was at the christening of Rupert Murdoch and his wife, former wife, something Deng, where his twin children were baptized on the spot where John the Baptist was supposed to have been baptized, right? And Tony Blair was in the water for this baptism. He wasn't in any of the publicity photos. He obviously was smart enough to stay out of it, but he was in the water and he was wearing white, and they all thought he looked like Jesus. And so when you hear Jesus being referred to by these people, it could actually be Tony Blair that they're talking about, which I think is a bit weird. But, these are the times that we're living in. So I don't know if you guys had time to read that. I'll put it in the link. But, yeah. Thoughts? Who's up?
They're too far out for me.
No, I think they are modern day arms dealers, basically. If you think of the traditional arms dealers, is they sell software, they sell the hardware of war, but they need war. Fundamentally, they need war and conflict, and what they are is actually they are kind of the taken arms dealing into that kind of technology and software sort of kind of data analysis and that sort of space in that way. So that's what they do. They need war, and their message is very much that. And they are also really bad philosophers. They're really bad theologians, really bad philosophers. They are the ones that take things out of context and then develop kind of their rationale out of it, as opposed to improve a body of knowledge and a body of understanding and wisdom. They do the opposite. They diminish the wisdom of a body. From a body of wisdom, they actually diminish it by picking out the quotes and picking out the things, and then actually allowing that to lead people to where they want. So they're very much publicists, arms dealing publicists in that way. That's kind of my limited take.
Yeah, you can check out Peter Thiel's Antichrist tour. That's interesting, especially if you're reading some of the opposition to it. Even he's understanding what the Antichrist is and how he's using it. It's fascinating. Joe, Sash?
I mean, for me, I think Palantir is a story. It sells really well. But I also think that the people behind it really do believe what they're doing. They're on board thinking that they're on the righteous side of things. They think they're making a choice, which when we talk about philosophy, and I think many times we talk about philosophy and you think that it's about ultimate enlightenment. Sometimes it's actually about clarity, right? And I think that's where I differ a little bit on this. I think what they do is they see things in a certain way, and they have a very clear vision of it, and it's that drives their behavior. I mean, not that I agree with them, but there are certain things about the way the world works where I can understand fully why the philosophy makes sense. What's happening perhaps in the Middle East currently, from an Israeli perspective, I can actually understand the philosophy behind it and what actually makes sense. At the same time, I can also see why for Hamas the philosophy also makes sense. They're not, the two sides aren't designed. I mean, the two philosophies are not designed to come to some kind of one of the philosophies will have to give way for the other to continue.
Absolutely. I can promise you that both sides there absolutely think they are the righteous ones.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about that.
And philosophically, what they're doing as well, I can understand what they're doing. I know that it's what it's philosophy. When I was studying philosophy, is like, first of all, there's some first principles, right? First principles can be different, and those first principles usually don't change. That's why they are the principles. And I think that's what you have to kind of take into account when you look at philosophy. You go like, okay, what are the first principles? And then based on that, are you acting out the philosophy based on those things? And very frequently, to break through, what you have to do is actually get down to the very principles and break down the first principles before you can have a kind of discussion. So that's kind of the hard thing, actually. That some of the things in life, the really hard decisions are the unpleasant ones, which are things you can't normally do. You wouldn't want to do. But if you had to take a step back and say, okay, now philosophically, what do I do? You're ultimately acting out the trolley problem, right? And if you're in that situation and you have the trolley problem, what would you do? What do you have to do? And for some groups, they have decided ahead of time what they're going to do. They are going to mow down the one person, because of to save the five, that sort of thing.
So, Joe, I want to just jump on that. So, I think
So
the Israelis, yep,
Yeah.
their belief, their cultural belief, the historical, and Hamas, right?
Yeah.
So I totally get with you. The tech bros, what do they believe, right? You hear them quoting a fantasy or a sci-fi book, and I'm a fantasy head from way back, not bit sci-fi, but not much.
Yeah.
And I'll hear like someone like Mark Zuckerberg, I think Snow Rider or something is his book, and he quotes from it, but he doesn't represent the meaning behind the book. And so you hear the authors of these books talking about these tech bros using them as inspiration, but actually they're not aligned to the true meaning under the book, right?
Mm.
I've sat in rooms in Silicon.
Oops.
Something happened there.
Tech bros have intervened.
Am I back?
Yeah. That throws intervened.
So they talk, and everybody listens, and they literally make no sense at all, but nobody ever goes against them. So I think there's I agree with what you're saying, but I think so if you go to the nerdright.com, which is Gul Duran's website, where I first started really digging into this sort of side of things, and I know, Sasha, you've got some views on this I'd love to hear, but these aren't the same things. They're really not. And there's some deluded thinking in the mix, and it's incredibly dangerous. And the sanctuary cities, the big events happening here in Singapore today, apparently it's not very well attended, which I'm kind of relieved about. This is some weird stuff that's going on, and they have power in government, and Trump is the first chance they've ever had and will probably ever have to make these dreams a reality. And these dreams aren't for everyone. It's for a very small select few, and screw the rest of us. So, and it's the failure of imagination, which we talked about before. I think we've got to get our heads around what's really going on, and what needs to be done to stop it, because this isn't about collectively moving forward as a global society to solve the biggest problems we have. This is a few people that are looking to save their own ass, and everybody else can go and get stuffed, literally. Sash, do you want to jump in, because I know you've got some thoughts on the broligarchy?
Yeah, of course. So two things mainly come to mind about the Palantir thing. Going back to like the world that I inherited as a millennial, I was raised with this belief as after 9/11 and the war on terror, that technology would make war very clean, something sort of like surgery, that like you can very precisely target the bad guys with no collateral damage. But that's just impossible. You can't. That's just unachievable. It's just basically the antithesis to the very nature of warfare. But people really, really wanted to believe that kind of thing was possible. And the second thing is whenever I hear about these, Peter Thiel and the kind of technology and their views, it always just goes back to just how fundamentally anti-human that the Silicon Valley ideology is, because it just feels like they're like these tools, these AI tools that they're building. They're supposed to be like the millennials were raised to believe that the internet, that social media was something that was supposed to connect us, that was supposed to bring the world together, supposed to democratize ideas and discussions. But then and that was that seemed to be achievable, at least maybe until around 2012, when they started putting in these algorithms, when they started the profit incentives, when they started prioritizing engagement and retention. And at that point, it was no longer about connecting people. It became honestly about like atomizing people more than anything. So now we're in a situation where the tech oligarchs there, causing the atomization and the fracturing of society, the decline in our institutions. After Citizens United, we decided that money equals political power, and with the tech oligarchs, they have all the money, and therefore they have all the political power. So we're really just going to have to ask ourselves, the next generations of leaders, if this is the kind of future that we want. If these tools, if this technology that is so powerful, that is so influential and so necessary for our lives, if we're just going to leave them in the hands of people like Mark Zuckerberg, leave them in the hands of people like Elon, that's going to be a really tough decision to make.
Well, if we hit 3 degrees warming, we won't be worrying about stuff like that.
No, I think it's super interesting what you're saying. When do you think the pivotal moment happened when this kind of changed?
I would say, you can fact check me on the exact date that Facebook decided that they were going to prioritize engagement and retention. I think that was 2014. It was sometime between 2012 2016.
Yeah, 2015 was about the year that it all went to shit.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a Canadian TV series called Continuum?
No.
If you get a chance, I mean, I liked it, but that's me kind of thing. But the story is basically about coming back from the future, coming back from 2077 to 2012, because that was the start of when they all went to shit. And that was when the story plot is actually that the techno bro repented and wanted to stop it and invented time travel to try and do that.
Well, I mean, I think if you talk about when the problem began, it began a long time ago. Because I've been studying media and employing media, right? And my whole thing is about how do you work for engagement? How do you get someone to listen longer? How do you get them to stay engaged? So that game's been around for a long time. We've been working at getting someone to listen an extra 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. It actually has been happening a long time. And what happened was the technology gave you the ability to amplify that, scale that up. So the desire to engage, that's always been there. It's not something that we try to stop. I mean, if you look at what people were saying about TV before the mobile, before the iPhone came along, up to that point, TV was this big menace, right? It was the one that was doing all the damage, and then the internet came along, and that was the one that was the big menace. And now actually mobile actually is what happened. So if you want to blame some pivotal moment, it's mobile, the ability to take this experience that you normally had some kind of respite from time to time, and you got home and had to dial up and had to get on the internet, and now you could carry it around with you and effectively be on the internet all the time. That's where it began. And if you want to talk about the pivotal moment, if you like, it probably was the invention of the like button. Right, that's when they decided to give you some kind of feedback on that, and that was, and it was the reason why it was kept is because the metrics showed that the like button worked really well. Right, it seems like the most mundane of things right now, but what's behind it all is just this fact that we're stupid human beings and we want attention. We like someone liking the stuff that we like, and we like to pay attention to things that we find important, something that triggers us emotionally, so we tend to go for it. And if you talk about what the world has been about, politicians have been doing that all the time. It used to be a thing where you had a different kind of platform with which you could do that, but now you just have the amplified platform. So we are the sad creatures that we are. We just respond to things the way we do. It's what is our strength. We're empathetic. We do tune in to something that is potentially painful or makes you feel angry or makes you laugh or whatever it is. But it's also the thing that's being exploited, right? And if you can put a price, if you can put a price and value on something, that's what capitalism will do. It'll say, okay, now how do I turn this into an advantage, right? If you think about what was happening, for instance, with Google before they figured out how to make money, they were being useful. They had the engagement. They had the whole thing going, and someone managed to find a way for them to turn that into something a bit more useful without being too damaging to the world. And I can't say that Facebook managed to do the same thing. Facebook was having its own problems as well. It couldn't make the money running this big, huge network, and they found something about the way the network can work, and then it just went out of control as people begin to go. They begin to master the tools, and then you have people within that who are actually amplifying it. So you have 100 different you have thousands and thousands of micro influencers who are doing things, putting out clickbait all the time. If you have that much clickbait going out, someone's going to encounter some clickbait, and it's gonna get you, right. It's gonna use up your dopamine. It's gonna wear you out. You're going to get anxious because you're going to be put into this, like the whole thing about algorithms, and we blame the algorithms. It's what we would do if as parents, if our kids like a certain kind of food, when we want to serve up some food, we're going to go and keep in mind that they like that kind of food. So that's why so many families get to eat chicken nuggets all the time, right? It's something that the audience responds to. So in that sense, I think what we're seeing is the scaling of the human condition via social media, right?
Yeah, so I just want to counter that a little bit, Joe, because you're presenting us and how we use it and how we interact with it and what's fed to us. But the nerd-like side is the data acquisition. So by walking around with our phones in our pocket, there is a record of exactly where we are, who we interact with, who we talk to, all of our medical data. If you've got apps, and even if you don't activate your apps, there's still a health data in your phone that's picking up information, how many steps a day you walk, right? Who we speak to, who we message, the private stuff as well as the public stuff, right? So that's the data bit. That's the money bit. Right. And so when we walk down the street, we'll get an ad for a Coke because we're walking past a machine, and they know that we bought Coke at the supermarket because we ordered it online. So they basically know every single thing about us. And by knowing every single thing about us, it's the fear of what they can do as far as control with that. Right. So when we talk about we don't trust the institutions, and yet we give all of our information to these companies, and we're not cognizant of what they're doing. We're paying attention to this other side, the rage and the baiting and all that sort of stuff, which is big. But there's this other side. We talked about AI companions, we talked about the meta glasses, we talked about all that sort of stuff, right? Our privacy. No matter where we go, someone can be talking to us. And these companies own AI now, right? So they've already done all this other stuff. They've already been building and basically creating societal breakdown and democratic failures. And now they're owning AI, and they're the ones that are buying up the land for the sanctuary cities, and they're the ones building the bunkers, and they're the one, it's like, come on, guys, when are we going to wake up? This is a massive risk to all of us, and we still go along with it, and when we talk about when will this technology go? When will we say we've had enough? I think a huge percentage of the population has stepped away from, especially from social media. Everywhere I go, people are like, I just don't want to be there anymore. And it's the only place we've got. That's our town square. It's the only place where we can put our point of view out there into the world. I'd love to disappear from it too. But I've got a global family, that I want to stay connected with. And that's why it's been a beautiful, because the beauty of it has always outweighed the bad. But I think we're moving into the point where it's still the case anymore. And you can't disappear. We've got to pay attention. But this is a big change.
I mean, I think I want to go back to one thing and again, to the relevance to Sasha in that sense, and the money. And this is at the back of these are companies that are invested in as ventures. And because they invested in ventures, they then have to expand and make money because a lot of money was put into it. And the driver behind all of those, behind our investments, is we fundamentally think of securing a future with money. And that's what we're locked into at the moment. So we, as in, I'm 61, and so I'm kind of a boomer locked into that. That's the mentality and so on. And the point here is, what's Sasha going to do? Are you contributing to a pension? Because if you're contributing to pension, that pension makes its money from this. It makes it money from the parental and all those things. The private equity that goes into these things, the incubating labs and all those things. And this is the path that it goes. There was a comment, I can't remember the precise phrasing of it, by a guy in that documentary Social Dilemma, which is talking about the social media and the the harm it was creating. And he made the point that when you throw a lot of money together into these things, then the result is exactly what you get. Because that money needs the returns. And this is the way to do it. As Joe is saying, it taps into that very long-term need, that innate thing. As Richard's disappeared. I didn't know where he's gone. In The Unsustainable Truth, we talk about a book written in the 50s, I think, called The Persuaders, which is about how do you actually go about marketing and that birth of marketing, from talking about the product to talking about the emotional attachments, that kind of innate psychological need that we have, that kind of Joe describes in that way. And that's what these exploits and takes to an advantage. The distinction between now with the like button is that it's real time. So you can immediately tune to the audience in that way. But the driver to it is our mentality that thinks we can secure a future with money. That's what it is. And if you think you want to secure your future with bowling and social interaction, social capital, then you're in a different world. Then you wouldn't invest in that way. You'd invest in a bowling club where you could actually go and spend time with people and drink beer. But you don't do that because you don't think that's going to return enough, because ultimately you think, I need more money because the future is even more uncertain. It's more uncertain because I invest in it with money. Yeah. Because that will deplete the whole planet of its resources by that hoarding that goes on through. And I create all these techno bros, and I think that giving Elon Musk $1 trillion is a good deal because my pensions will make so much out of it.
Yeah. It's the great irony, isn't it?
Back down, because that's where that individual agency for young people really comes from. You can destroy your own future or you can remake it.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about this moment right now is that I was listening to someone who was fully invested in crypto, and he was asked what was the danger, or what is the unseen or unforeseen thing that would probably change his position greatly. And I thought it was very interesting. The idea was that as you talked about this, investing in social capital and stuff like that. His idea of what would destroy the financial system that we have right now and could lead to something very nice is actually if AI were to develop with a higher sense of intellect, or when AI gets to AGI or super intelligence, and let's say if it gets to that point, what's going to happen is this: currency as we know it is not going to be determined by us. As in, if there's a super intelligence, and it's by definition has more insight to how things might work, it might happen that super intelligence might figure out another kind of currency where money isn't the thing anymore, and then it could be this. It could be something else as well. Who knows? But that's we can all hope for that. That could be the big radical change that comes in if we've brought up, first of all, AGI well enough so that it moves on to super intelligence and it grows up and becomes a nice kid.
Yeah, Sorry,
Dave, I just want to move us on because I'm looking at the time, so I want us to do 2 more stories, and it looks like Richard thinks there might have been a cable severed outside the hotel, so there's doubt that he'll be able to come back on. But I want to do 2 more stories before we wrap up. The first one is the world is heating exceptionally fast. So there's a piece, I think it's in The Guardian, world's major cities hit by 25% leap in extremely hot days since the 1990s. So the number of days above 35 degrees Celsius in 43 rose from an average of 1,062 days a year from 1994 to 2003 to 1,335 from 2015 to 2024. So it's seen across the world, with the average number of days above 35 degrees Celsius doubling in Rome and Beijing and tripling in Manila. Now, wet bulb temperatures start to become deadly. They used to say it was from 35 degrees. Now they're saying it's from 31 degrees Celsius. So this is important. In Madrid, there are now an average of 47 days a year over 35 degrees Celsius compared with 25 before. And in London, the number of days above 30 degrees Celsius doubled. And I know in the UK, they all love that, but that's not a good thing. So in 2024 in Singapore, they used to average 4 days that were considered dangerous, like the wet bulb temperature had moved into dangerous territory. In 2024, it had 188 days in 1 year above the wet bulb temperature safety sort of minimum. So if anyone's sort of arguing with you about climate change, so when we talk about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in the future that we're planning and where the money's going to go, I'm like, they're saying we're going to hit 3 degrees Celsius by 2050 now. And of course, it's not just we're going to wake up on the 1st of January 2050 and it's 3 degrees above, pre-industrial, right? It's going to be a gradual. Everything's going to get worse. Food, droughts, heat, storms. We haven't had a massive hurricane go across the US yet, but it's only a matter. They nearly had 2. Did you see the 2 that were sort of going beside each other, which might actually strike the coast of Ireland this weekend, which is like, wow. So things are getting pretty serious on the environment front. The Pope's coming out. He's speaking up. I'm really pleased that he's 100% behind the Laudato Si movement. We had a fantastic conversation about that. But David, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but the Deutsche Bank has issued a grim warning for the AI industry, because I think this is important. Do you want to jump in on that one?
I think Richard had a little bit more, but I think personally, I think the AI industry is going to continue. Well, reminds me of the tulip bubbles in Tulip Mania in kind of Holland back in the day. In that way. Everyone bought into it. Everyone got into it. It's really sponsored at the moment by governments, the way I see. Everything is about how AI is going to resolve this thing. And I see it as part of this aging problem as well. We're looking for ways for that innovative kind of creativity, because people are getting older. The ones in control are getting older and they can't quite see. And so they're going forward and trying to do this. The problem I see is that I don't see how you really are going to make the money in that way. So that's kind of that bubble in that sense. But there's no reason why this can't carry on and continuing on for a lot longer. It's just part of this thing where we're following the wrong thing. And the reason why I think is the biggest problem is because, as I mentioned earlier, if AI finds the cure for cancer, what does it do? It's actually not fixing anything. It's just prolonging the population, who are now going to be, from octogenarian to centurions to sort of and living past that in that way. So all of these things, is a vicious circle, is a vicious cycle in that. So I'm not surprised about a bank coming up with a report saying, be careful, the industry is very inflated, you've got all these things and so on. But in the end, when you have all the governments, you look at the UK and look at the US and France and Germany and all those things, they are behind it. They are the ones who are saying, we need more AI in our departments, we need more AI in all these things. I was talking to a friend who was saying about how he works now for a traditional finance company, and they're bringing in AI because they feel they need to bring in AI.
Mm.
And it's actually taking away the opportunities for young people and young professionals.
Yeah.
They are making it impossible to have that kind of initial experience. And for all the talk about how you can do all these things better and so on, it goes back down into a case of saying, well, I don't have to deal with all these things. I can make my profits if I can make my profits. And a lot of things are truisms. Some companies are going to make a lot of money out of it. Of course they are. A friend of mine back in the day of the dot-com era made this observation, which was, of course, some companies are going to make a lot of money out of it. But what the industry is priced at is that every company involved in this is going to make a lot of money out of it. That's what makes it a bubble. It's when you have no discerning at all about which ones genuinely create kind of new resources that we need. You just blindly price everything as the ones who's going to make the most money out of it.
But then you've got the societal impact of like too much electricity, too much water use. That I think in the UK they can build 10, and it'll be a big pressure on the grid. But there's 100 in the plans. So it's also the societal implications as well, right? Which is going to make it more expensive for the individual because energy bills are going to go up because of this as well, right?
Well, that really goes down to that fundamental aspect that, in a way I'm alluding to in calling up for the young people and young professionals. I'd love to recruit them into my course, which is really a question of how we want to think. What gives you joy? It's really a question of what gives you joy? How do you want to thrive? And what is the pace at which you want to move? You look at the lion. I did a post on this earlier this week about, sort of be like the lion. What does the lion do? It spends most of its time lying down sleeping. It's like my cat.
Yeah.
And when it's doing that, it's nourishing nature. But we look at the lion in our nature program as the king of the jungle, jumping around and, kind of preying on some gazelle or something and jumping on them. And we see them chasing it. And we think that's what makes him king of jungle. No, the lion actually nurtures by spending most of his time lying around, giving everything the chance to find their place, their own space. It doesn't judge who's doing what. But we are very keen on judging everything that happens. And the more we think about this as a crisis, the more we're drawn into this idea of judgment, which is really what all the social media is about, because it allows you to click I like or I don't like. You can place your judgment onto it. And the essence about judgments, it denies opportunity for things to just happen.
Yeah.
And that's when abundance comes.
Well, I'm just going to push back against the lion thing. I think the real issue is all the lions are living too close to each other now, right? So it's not a case of it's not.
But that's part of our problem that we've created, right? So we've forced ourselves into a situation where we have run ourselves into this hamster wheel. And the essence, the really big thing, the really big resolution of this crisis is how do we allow young people, young professionals, to let their own genius shine without having to burden them with saying you got to make the world better. The world is already better because they're there. Just go and do. And stop judging about what it might be, because we know we've made a mess of it, and we know everything is in a bit of, kind of shit shape. Hence the name of the show. So, just allow things to be.
All right, Joe, I'm going to bring you in. Any thoughts on AI? Anything else? And I'm going to give Sasha a chance to say your final thoughts.
Oh yeah, well, this one last thing about the way things are a chance to be, right? I think the challenge sometimes is we tend to be nostalgic about when we look at things like that and we say, we're looking for opportunities. They don't have the same opportunities. I can tell you, I have no desire. When I was young and sort of going into work, right, I had no desire to use a typewriter. I mean, I when I was very young, I used to think, oh, great, I'm going to be able to use a typewriter. But as I got older, I kind of didn't like it at all, and now I don't have any desire for it. And I think sometimes we look at opportunities in terms of having the same kind of path. We're going to create the same kind of stepping stones for younger people as well. And I think the new path for the young person is going to be this. They're going to be they're going to be judged much more on their attitudes and their ability to learn. And I think the future is going to be a future about, we want to get good people in a company who are able to learn to do different things, who are able to speak the language of AI, who are going to be able to prompt AI or figure out things and get along with each other. I mean, I think that's the new set of valuable skills in the future. So I think some of the things that we hung on to as well as valuable for our generation, they're just completely irrelevant. So I think the new successful person is going to have a different start. And if we try to impose on them the same sorts of opportunities and say like, well, why don't you come in and do the same thing? Come and be an intern in this particular area. I think we're actually doing them a disservice. I think a young person coming in should be given the opportunity to say, okay, if you had a chance to run an entire department, what would you do?
Yeah. Although we did have a fair bit of that. We did have a fair bit of that in the last 20 years. The young people were embraced because we needed their mindset, and that became a bit. But all right, Sasha.
By the same token, Doge is an example of how that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Sasha. So you're on mute. So unmute yourself. All right, you've listened to us. We've listened to you. So any final thoughts before we do our wrap up?
Yeah. In terms of AI, there's an article I read in The Argument, which is a online magazine that I really like. It's written by Derek Thompson, just talking about how there's been this general decline in ability to think among students because so many are relying on AI to get their assignments done. And he was talking about it specifically in the context of reading and writing, because when you're writing, as you're writing something, you're actually thinking, and so that's actually, you're actually flexing that muscle. But we're starting to lose that in some pretty profound ways. Like students are now unable to, follow directions with more than 2 steps, or they're unable to actually articulate their thoughts or surroundings or anything. And so that goes back to something I said previously, that there's something fundamentally anti-human about about the Silicon Valley ideology. And it's the Silicon Valley ideology that forms the foundations of how these AI systems are built. So I think it would be in the best interest of for future generations if we were just to, if we were to just enact the right set of policies, the right set of reforms to ensure that this AI is actually for the benefit of all of us, not just a few. That these are actually, healthy, that we have a healthy relationship with these AI systems. Because if we don't, then I don't know, the future looks kind of bleak. A future where no one is able to think or articulate or actually do anything, frankly, because they've completely outsourced their humanity to ChatGPT.
Yeah. Well, I've got a 17-year-old doing his final year of IB, and he gave me a piece of his history essay, which I know he has written. But he gave it to me, and I was like, "Well, that's pretty impressive." You've done a good job, mate. And he goes, "Well, I did feed it AI, and it's hard for me because I need to be supportive of him using it, because that would be stupid if I wasn't, and he's allowed to. I just wanted to make sure he wrote it first, so that he went through that thinking process. I think it's at the end it's fine, but not the whole way. So yeah, so we're all in this fight together. I'm a believer that the older we are, the more we have to fight for the future, because I don't think the kids should have to do it. I think we created the mess. Let's go and sort it out. We've enjoyed the best of times, that the world's had to offer. So it's time to give back. A friend of mine I just saw on LinkedIn today was content marketing sort of background. He's decided to become a gardener, a full-time gardener. So he set up a little business. He's not making that much money compared to what he could have made in the corporate world, but he's decided to go full into that. So I think that's another thing. It's like really thinking about different futures. relearning skills that have started to die out because older people have sort of retired and younger people weren't coming behind. So I think, we just got to look at the future in a different way. All right. So Sasha, thank you so much for joining us and giving your perspective, and good luck. I know Sasha's looking for a job. Do you want to sort of tell people what you're looking for?
Yeah. So as I said, my background is in international affairs. Geopolitics is a particular interest of mine. Worked as a researcher, worked in the anti-corruption office at the State Department, and so I'm looking for anything that can intersect in the policy analysis space.
Yeah, he's a polycrisis man, so he's paying attention, which is why we enjoyed meeting each other, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
The interesting thing for me the whole time, Sasha, is how you're from the US, and you will, of all the people on the chat, I think you were the most worried about what you were going to say.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's absolutely kind of reflective of the current moment in the US.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So, what's keeping you distracted? Who wants to go first?
Taylor Swift's new album thing. I was reading some review about it, and it was it's really interesting. It popped up as one guy, I think it might have been in the Guardian or something, and he was saying, it's his top album of the week, and he was basically saying it was crap. And I was thinking, if this is your top album of the week and it's crap, then you're having a bad week.
Yeah, album of the week. It used to be albums of the year, right? So that's also another sign.
Yeah.
Steve said, great job, Sasha. I missed some of the earlier comments. I need you guys helping me with the comments. We had Frank as well, Frank Gentle. I think that's how you say your surname. If I got it wrong, Frank, I apologize. Joe? Oh, no, so that Taylor Swift thing, she's getting lots of media coverage, and I think finally getting some of the credit that she deserves. And you've got a teenage daughter, so I'm sure she's a bigger part of your life than my life. Yeah. Joe?
Well, my brother's been visiting, so we've been playing host to them and experiencing both sides of the F1 effect on the price of hotel rooms. So he was here last week when things were reasonably inexpensive, and where to this week it's gone to not so reasonably inexpensive. And I've also had to worry about getting around because I don't have a car. I gave up the car. And for most times, it's pretty all right. It's pretty reasonable. But during a season like F1, when everyone is around trying to get a car in the middle of the afternoon, it's not inexpensive. It's not impossible at all, but it's just very expensive. So that's the little thing.
Well, that's good to know. So stay home for the weekend, yeah?
Especially if you happen to be in the city area. But if you're away from there, I think you should be okay.
Yeah, I don't think people kind of realize how much Singapore is completely overrun by the whole Formula One. Like, it's just, my boys are going, I think Steve's going with one of my sons, Jack's, tonight. But tomorrow night, God, there's a band on. I can't remember it. Anyway, the boys are going. So the entertainment is very good here. I wanted to see Elton John, but we didn't get any tickets. Because he's supposed to have retired. And I was like, I've got another chance to see him, but I didn't get any tickets. Anyway, Sasha, what are you doing to take your brain off the serious things in life?
Yeah, in between trying to, sending resumes, trying to network, I'm just being a tourist here in Singapore.
Yeah,
amazing country.
How long have you been here for now?
I've been here since July. And then then I got to head home in mid-November for my cousin's wedding, and then make my way back.
Yeah, nice. So Steve reminded me it was the Foo Fighters. The new episode of Slow Horses is on. Have you guys watched it?
I'm still waiting for a few of them to build up so I can watch a bit of it as a bit of a binge.
Gary Oldman's character is as disgusting as he's always been, but I gotta tell you, and it seems to be a bit of the incel sort of culture, so it kind of felt very in tune with the moment. But I'm going to enjoy getting stuck into that. I didn't realize there was a build up. Okay, I thought they were all out. So if we have to wait, I might not. I might have to sit back for a while. But Slow Horses is out. If you haven't seen any of them, start watching them there.
That's really interesting. I grew up with, you wait the week for the episode, right? Everybody waits for the Sunday, right? And you watch the new episode coming out. Now we wait for the whole series to be there so that we can binge. And I think it's part of this bowling alone kind of thing, because everybody used to talk about what happened afterwards. So because it was released, it was dropped, everybody sort of saw it, and then the next one, and it fed the conversation. Now you just watch in isolation, you never talk about it.
Yeah. By the way,
within your own families.
Just to bring it around, I'm not sure, but is this the logo that you're talking about? The pirate logo? Yeah. So it's called One Piece. Quite a nice series, actually. There's a live action one, really crazy series on Netflix as well. But very appropriate for a modern take on piracy.
Yeah. No, indeed. All right, guys. Thanks so much, Sasha. Thank you so much for joining us. Joe, David, good to see you. Richard said that there's police outside the hotel, so obviously something. If we hear about an incident in Amsterdam, it means Richard's in the middle of it. So good to see everyone. And so we're not here next week because I'm doing my final coaching course thing. So we're going to have a week off and then we'll be back. But good to see everyone, and we'll see you all very soon. All right.
Yep.
So
okay.
bye.
Good to see you.